the worst thing that happened to Van Halen before the reunion, because the reunion was its own thing. That don't even register in any rock and roll story. It just was so bizarre.
If you have ever wondered about what happened behind the scenes of Van Halen, you should listen to what Sammy Hagar says about Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth. It might surprise you. In this video, we will explore the famous and complicated relationship between Sammy Hagar, Eddie Van Halen, and David Lee Roth. Sammy Hagar shares real stories about Van Halen's rise to fame, conflicts, and what made the band great. If you are curious about the tensions between these rock legends, stay tuned because Sammy has some surprising insights. Let's uncover this musical story together. The wild ride of Van Halen's success. Van Halen became one of the biggest rock bands of all time in a journey that feels like a movie, full of drama and prominent personalities. It all began with Eddie Van Halen, a guitar legend whose skill was unmatched. However, every great story has its conflicts. In 1980, Sammy Hagar joined Van Halen when the band was at a turning point. They had just lost their original singer, David Lee Roth, known for his wild personality and creative differences from Eddie. Hagar stepped in to help bring the band back to success after a tough time. But things were not as easy as expected. Bringing Sammy into Van Halen was a risk. Fans loved Roth's energetic shows and theatrical style. Sammy was different. He didn't have the same party vibe. He offered a more mature approach, strong vocals, and a fresh sound, but this came with challenges. While the band continued to succeed, Sammy's personal relationships with Eddie and the rest of the group started to struggle. The turning point, Eddie and Sammy's strained bond. Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen had a unique relationship. They worked creatively together, but there was a lot of tension between them. Hagar says that Eddie was a guitar genius and a complex and sometimes difficult person. In interviews, Sammy has openly discussed the challenges of collaborating with Eddie. He described Eddie as a perfectionist who could be unpredictable and volatile. This unpredictability affected more than just their music. Personal issues between Sammy and Eddie arose while they were recording hit albums. Sammy noted that Eddie's constant need for control changed the band's dynamic. Sammy was not one to follow orders, which led to conflicts. Despite their challenges, they created some of Van Halen's most famous albums together, like 5150 and UB12. However, their relationship problems became more evident. Sammy's direct honesty often shows in how he talks about Eddie's behavior. Sometimes erratic, sometimes brilliant, but always complex. David Lee Roth's return, an awkward reunion. The dynamics within Van Halen became more complicated when David Lee Roth returned. After a long break, Roth and the band found common ground and had a much-anticipated reunion tour in 2007. However, the tension between Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth was still noticeable, overshadowing their reunion. Sammy Hagar openly discusses Roth and Eddie's rivalry. He explains that their conflict was personal, not just about music. Hagar points out that Roth's flashy and theatrical style clashed with Eddie's more thoughtful and innovative approach, often leading to disagreements on stage and behind the scenes. Sammy compares their relationship to two boxers, each trying to outdo the other and control the band's direction. Their problems were not just about musical differences, they involved strong personalities, big egos, and different visions for Van Halen. Each member wanted to protect their legacy, which created a competitive, intense atmosphere. The real truth behind the breakup. As Sammy Hagar reflects on his time with Van Halen, he acknowledges that while the band created an immense catalog of iconic music, their journey was marred by significant personal and interpersonal challenges. He notes that the chemistry that propelled their chart-topping hits often coexisted with unresolved tensions among the bandmates. It wasn't solely the allure of producing legendary tracks that motivated Hagar to remain in Van Halen. Instead, it was the profound opportunity to collaborate with Eddie Van Halen, whose guitar prowess and creativity were unparalleled. However, he admits that the underlying struggles became glaringly apparent once the music sessions ceased. Hagar's exit from Van Halen was far from a straightforward decision encapsulated by a single reason. It represented the culmination of years of conflict and creative differences, particularly with Eddie, compounded by the revived rivalry between Eddie and original frontman David Lee Roth. The tipping point came when Eddie expressed a desire to shift his focus towards a personal solo project, leaving Sammy feeling like the foundation he had generously invested in had been abruptly pulled out from underneath him. The atmosphere turned charged with tension, ultimately leading to the closing of an essential chapter in Hagar's life. Sammy's perspective on the breakup is a sobering reflection on untapped potential. He believes that Van Halen could have ascended to even greater artistic and commercial heights had it not been for the personal clashes and egos that consistently hindered their progress. It wasn't merely a matter of business disputes, it was a series of emotional rifts and creative breakdowns that led to an irreparable fracture within the band. Hagar's insight underscores the complex interplay between artistry and relationships, revealing how the latter can profoundly impact the former. The real struggle: can a band survive such massive egos? One of the biggest challenges any band faces is managing different personalities and egos. The history of Van Halen shows that even with great talent and success, personal conflicts can be a significant obstacle. Sammy Hagar, who became the lead singer in 1985, wasn't the only one who struggled with Eddie Van Halen's strong personality. David Lee Roth, the original frontman and a key part of the band's early success, also had to deal with Eddie's fiery nature. The question remains, what happens when a band's creative genius also comes with a tough ego? Hagar has often wondered if a famous band like Van Halen could have kept going strong if not for their ongoing personal conflicts. His experiences with Eddie demonstrate a contradiction. While their musical collaboration was exceptional, the tensions between them created serious challenges that affected their teamwork. This story reminds us that even rock legends like Eddie Van Halen are human and can have personal conflicts. When two strong personalities come together, pressure can build, causing inevitable disagreements. Balancing creative work and personal goals becomes difficult in these situations, and ultimately, something will have to change. What could have been a different path for Van Halen? Hagar reflects on the potential for a distinct trajectory in Van Halen's evolution, despite the interpersonal difficulties that plagued the band. He posits that if the members had been more adept at navigating their differences, they might have forged ahead, continuing to create exceptional music that resonated with fans. The question looms, could Sammy have been the unifying force needed to extend the band's lifespan? Or would Eddie's innate desire for control have ultimately undermined such efforts? As Sammy contemplates the possibility of a prolonged collaboration, he acknowledges the intricate and tumultuous narrative of the Van Halen saga. The interplay of clashing personalities, compounded by pronounced creative divergences, was a recipe for discord that led to the band's eventual disbandment. For Sammy, the experience encompassed far more than mere musical collaboration. It revolved around the dynamics of the relationships formed within the band. While he harbors no regrets about his tenure with Van Halen, he longs for an alternate reality where their interactions could have been more harmonious. He believes firmly that, had circumstances allowed, he could have continued to contribute compelling music while preserving the essence of Van Halen's legacy. However, he understands that personal relationships don't always unfold in the idealistic manner we envision. Sammy opens up, the moment that changed everything. In a heartfelt interview, Sammy shares when he realized his time with Van Halen was over. It wasn't just the music that motivated him, it was the dream of being part of something great. When Sammy hit rock bottom with Eddie and David, he knew it was time to move on. There was no big argument, just the understanding that sometimes things can't be fixed, no matter how hard you try. This moment changed Sammy forever. It marked the end of an era for him and for Van Halen fans who still hope for the classic lineup. Ultimately, Sammy Hagar's time with Van Halen was a wild and unforgettable journey. His honesty about the struggles with Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth shows the personal challenges that can arise in even the most successful rock bands. While their music will live on, the tensions between these icons remind us that dealing with people can be the most challenging part. Watch our next video if you want to hear more untold stories from rock and roll.